I usually like to say new year, new anime for my winter previews, and juxtapose that with some ecchi scene saying I haven't changed despite everything else having done so. But when looking at the roster, I'm feeling more like the last decade didn't actually end, and we're being dragged back to 2015. Sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. I had to pick shows first, and I used my usual method, placing bets on which names would be rejected for the newest COVID variant, and whichever barely got cut were my winners. Who knew the World Health Organization was so full of weebs? Anyway, I've got a hell of a roster. Madhouse brings Hakozume, Koban Joshi no Gyakushuu, where a woman cop wants to quit the force, but decides to stick it out because of her sexy new boss. ORIENT comes at us with some supernatural samurai sword battles against demons in an entirely standard story. Since fishing is such a boring sport, Slow Loop throws some cute girls into the mix to get weebs somewhat interested. Doll's Frontline is a sci-fi post-apocalyptic series where androids are fighting an AI threat. Q takes the typical idol show formula, but applies it to voice acting. Our entry for totally not an isekai is Shikkakumon no Kenja, where a sage reincarnates himself only to learn the world sucks now. Cloverworks has a double-header with Sono Bisque doll wa Koyo Suru, about a Hina doll making otaku who's approached by the hot girl at school so he can make her a cosplay sensation. And then they bring out Akebi-chan no Sailor-fuku, which is about a girl who's way too into her school uniform. Realist Hero comes back for round 2 to offer obvious solutions to stupid problems. Kaijin Kaihatsu-bu no Kuroitsu-san is about how working for an evil organization is pretty much like working for a normal one. Because I can't get any shoujo ai this season, I'll settle for some shonen ai, with Sasaki to Miyano. For an actual isekai, Fantasy Bishoujo Juniku Ojisan to is about an old man being turned into a cute girl. And that's the joke. When it rains, it pours, with Kenja no Deshi o Nanoru Kenja, where a guy becomes his video game alt instead of his main. Koroshi Ai is about 2 assassins falling in love while on the job. Ari Fureta's first season was so poorly done, they recruited Studio Mother to come help for the second. So, let's see how that goes. And lastly, in what surely won't be a trend in basically repeating what worked in the past, Vanitas no Carte is back for its second cour to finish off on the cliffhanger it left off on. I've got a lot to unpack, so let's get into this mess of repeats. Let's kick things off with Hakozume. This one's about a female police officer who's fed up with her job because she wasn't really that invested in it in the first place. That is until a new girl boss steps into the picture and changes her mind. Mostly because this woman's not just a good role model, but she's also beautiful. That's pretty shallow. While that description might make you think this is some steamy Yuri series where a girl finds a new lease on life, you'd be wrong. This is a standard slice of life comedy show, with comedy being in massive air quotes, because that tag is basically there to tell you this won't have much of a plot, as it stammers out stale jokes that lack any punch. Yeah, slow wind-up times for lines that aren't even that clever, or situations so telegraphed the joke is spoiled by the time it lands. Then again, I don't know, maybe the jaded beauty and lazy new girl are supposed to be endearing, but honestly the cast could barely stand out as side characters in another anime. The animation is pretty lacking in ambition as well for a Madhouse property, where the characters barely move and the voice actors can't even match what little emotion the models are expressing. But it does make me wonder why the hell the backgrounds are so well done. Stiff in not just its art but its delivery as well makes this something easily passed up, unless you're really looking for a show about how crappy the daily grind of police work can be. From run-of-the-mill comedy to run-of-the-mill action, ORIENT is next. So in the 1500s, some beings called Kishin came to Japan and basically ended the Warring States period by conquering the whole country. It's now later, and a group of people called Bushidan, a play on words that's nowhere near as clever as the creator thought it was, are fighting back against them so humans can live freely. Could that work as an anime? Sure, if the plot wasn't handled in the most nonsense way possible. The Kishin want ore, so they brainwashed and pacified the human race while keeping them living pretty decent lives, and they educate the miners, so they can make them slaves and eat them? What? Why does this have so many steps if they're just gonna enslave an already subservient population? Just enslave and eat them already, what the fuck? The animation is fine from a technical standpoint, but the designs leave a lot to be desired, where the obvious main characters look like anime protagonists, and the rest look like no one gave a shit. Not to mention the demons looking like fat cat blobs with no faces until they roid out. I'm sorry, what the hell? This is the type of show you think is super cool when you're like 15 because you don't question your media, but myself being well beyond that age range now, this lost me at the motorcycle in feudal Japan. This is dumb. So, if you like mindless shonen shows, this'll be right up your alley. I'm 0 for 2 in this season so far, so hopefully Slow Loop can salvage something in my soul. A girl whose deceased father taught her to fish dodges responsibility by going to fish when she's avoiding meeting her new stepdad. There she meets an obvious flag, and teaches the new airheaded girl she just met to fish as well. After they become fast friends, the two discuss what brought them out there in the first place, and they find out they're actually sisters because that was telegraphed a mile away. This is your cute girls doing a sports anime, and I have to say, it's at least well put together. It builds tension well as the main girl tries to cope with the changes in her life. However, it's not that sort of deep, self-reflective series, as mostly it's about the relationship between the two main girls. Bonding between these two new sisters means some comedy and hijinks ensue, and the timing and animation for that is well executed to at least make me not bored while watching. For animation, this at least tries, and my bar for that is pretty low by this point. Utilizing different angles and points of view is often a good start, but it mixes in a variety of styles, with chibi and the more standard cute look, while packing in movement with the camera. It feels alive, and I like that. A nice slice of life series to check out this season. Because I'm a fucking idiot who keeps taking mobile game bait season after season, Doll's Frontline is here with post-apocalyptic mass-produced android battles. Is it good? No. Because the first episode starts with what feels like a YouTube video or opening cinematic, breaking down the plot of the game over some generic rock music and out-of-context visuals. At least it addresses the sheer number of dupes you'll be getting in the gacha by just having the actual same fucking units filling the background roles. Wow, I can't tell if that's bad design or honest marketing. Not to mention, they couldn't even draw new frames for that voiceover. They just recycled parts of the show you're about to see. What the fuck? And that's separate from the just plain recycled animation the series uses throughout. Bad first impression, and it only gets worse as it goes on. When the music kicks up and the action finally starts, the moment-to-moment editing falls apart where who knows what's happening. Shots are fired, some random androids are falling over, but there's no context or stakes established. The editing here is just a fucking nightmare. I could do a whole video on that alone. This is incredibly lazy, and I've seen other mobile game tie-in animes that have put in more effort than this. Most of the budget looks like it was put into the character designs, since the backgrounds are all grungy snow-covered settings, or busted city hellscapes, and very little effort was put into making the characters move nicely or even have different builds. They all have the same exact slender anime girl with big tits and a different head attached. This is just a mess. Skip it. Let's try our luck with a show about the anime industry itself, with Q. This one starts off really strong by introducing the audience through a scene of the anime the cast is working on, but that builds a lot of excitement and intrigue for a show that's ultimately not going to deliver because it's a false premise. All that cool animation and drama built up, that's not the show you're watching. This also feels a bit like a ragtag team of idols coming together to make a group that'll defy the odds, if you're familiar with that subgenre story beats, but I digress. The plot here is a no-name agency has a bunch of unknown voice actors signed up to them, and that's their plan, to foster new talent. So what's the catch? Well, I guess they're all suffering from some serious anime personality syndromes, like main character-itis, edgelord's disease, and too bland for a leading role. The main problem here is not a lot is spurring this series forward, especially with such a large cast. That works against it, because without a driving plot, the characters are what keep the audience invested, and with no standout leads, who am I watching this for? The animation is pretty subpar, with entirely standard color palettes and zero effort put into style or cinematography, as all the shots are locked and waist up. And that's sad, because while this is creatively showing the acting scenes, it does some actual decent work, saying the studio could do better, but chose to use its budget and time on gimmicks. I think this could be okay if the series shapes up, but as it stands, it's gonna be forgettable. I'm praying to whatever god will listen at this point for something that's not a hot mess. And Shikkakumon no Saikyou Kenja is hopefully my answer. So is Saikyou's great at magic but lacks the special magic permit for close quarters combat, decides that he doesn't want to play the support role and re-rolls himself into another life. The problem is, now it's hundreds of years later. He has all of his memories, the magic crest that says that he can fight in close quarters now, and the world's magic knowledge has regressed so much that he's considered weak. Based on said magic permit. But But now he's out to show them what for, the dumbass whippersnappers. This is another in a long line of badass main characters rolling over their worlds at their obscene power levels that have become popular as of late, which brings the misfit of Demon King Academy to mind as an obvious comparison, though this one lacks the intent that series had by being more focused on the power fantasy, and that makes it sorta tedious to watch when you know the outcomes of struggles before they happen. It's also incredibly fast-paced, which would be fine if this was a comedy series glossing over the setup, but it's not, so it feels inconsequential. The animation is pretty subpar, with an incredibly flat color palette, not much in the way of interesting movements or camera work, even cutting away from the action itself, and a generic fantasy setting with bland backgrounds that really strip any personality this might have had. It's not bad, but it's also not great. I'd say give it a pass unless you're really looking for a power fantasy. Next, let's start our Cloverworks double feature with Sono Bisque doll wa Koyo Suru. This is about a guy who wants to make Hina dolls professionally, which is a pretty traditional Japanese career. And while he has the talent, he's looked upon with disgust by his peers because he's so singularly devoted to it. Enter the main girl who noticed his talents, and she has a particular hobby of her own that she wants his help with, that being cosplay. So an unlikely romance opens up as a nerdy doll maker teams up with a cosplay sensation in the making for a story that's sure to be pretty damn cute. That is, if you can get past how creepy the main character is, purely from his obsession. He's not a bad guy. The two leads are likable, with a shy introverted male breaking gender stereotypes, and an outgoing girl that, despite her looks, isn't a bitch, pulling him out of his shell. Plus, it's built on a working relationship between them, so it's not forced. The animation here is well done, utilizing nice camera work and cinematography to sell a mood effectively, and I like that, especially since it's not beating us over the head with monologues. Instead, it uses the animation to sell them. It's got heart and a feel-good story, so it's definitely worth a look. Keeping with the slice of life masters at Cloverworks, Akebi-chan no Sailor-fuku is next. So a girl who lives out in the sticks has her heart set on a specific private girls' school, mostly because she likes the uniforms. When she gets in, she's excited to start her middle school life full of new firsts. All, in her uniform, obviously, and that's about it. This is such a standard slice of life anime premise that it's almost weird how by the numbers it is, at least from a plot standpoint. This one is on point with its jokes and setting, getting us familiar with the cast in a way that makes them likable and relatable. While Sono Bisque doll was decently animated, this is prime Cloverworks. How they use close-ups matched with environment and framing to set a scene and mood effectively. Plus just a wonderful use of colors that make everything vibrant and pop. I can practically breathe the country air watching parts of this show, it's so nicely done. I'm actually digging this one quite a bit, more than I thought I would actually. Check it out for a good slice of life show. It'd be a huge dick move on my part to throw an ad break in right about now. Moving on. Realist Hero's second core is here to finish out the bait it left us with. If you're not familiar, probably start with episode 1 and not 14, but it's about a guy summoned to another world, made king after basically being told he's better for the job by the current king, and instituting massive public works and reforms to the country's economy. And a war gets sprinkled in too where he proves he's a military genius. So it's more of that. If you were expecting any big reveals or shift in my thoughts, sorry to disappoint. I thought the first core was mediocre and don't have high hopes, because this series feels like a ton of other isekais and doesn't differentiate itself much. Next up is Kaijin Kaihatsu-bu no Kuroitsu-san, where a researcher from a stereotypical evil organization bent on taking over the world with monsters, constantly being thwarted by heroes in a Sentai anime, struggles with just how painfully corporate the organization is. I think this has a lot of potential humor, and it is a comedy, taking the usual overtime and often hellish working conditions associated with corporate Japan and throwing in the absurd fantasy elements of the setting. Does it work? Well, this series takes all the cheese the Sentai genre oozes and relishes in that with villains that chew the scenery, allowing for the rather normal work problems of the main cast to juxtapose well with that absurdity. Is it unique in that regard? Not particularly, as the bad guys looking normal instead of evil is a trope, one that's been done before in anime, but at least this is a fun example of it. The animation here isn't too special, but the draw here is the gimmick, humor, and timing, which the series manages well by playing with its medium. Jokes land and are punctuated by the animation, making an overall enjoyable experience. I'd say check this out for an absurd fantasy comedy, especially if you like Sentai. Let's get some love into our lives as Sasaki to Miyano. When you think about boys' love, an edgy upperclassman and dorky underclassman come to mind. And unfortunately for one of our leads, even though he thinks himself an expert on the genre, he doesn't quite notice he's in the exact situation described. So the other's gonna have to get him up to speed on this whole gay romance thing by being innocently dumb. It's pretty fast-paced, really getting to what we came for in the first place. And that's a super embarrassed cute otaku getting fawned over by his handsome tall senpai. That leads into the bread and butter of this series. Cute embarrassed reactions and snappy comedy. It succeeds off that, by using humor to lead to embarrassment, and then building off that for more humor. That creates a spiral, where the cast has chemistry as its foundation. As while it's overreacting and embarrassment, you can tell there's genuine affection at its core. For animation, it's honestly not bad for the slice-of-life school comedy genre, where simplistic designs reign supreme by actually breaking into more detailed close-ups to punctuate the more heartfelt scenes, showing the studio cared about how this story was told. I'd say check this out for a cute comedy this season. We've got fantasy Bishoujo Juniku Ojisan next. So two childhood friends are walking home from a party one night when they get abducted into another world. Problem is, one gets gender swapped, and now's a hot girl, and that makes things awkward between them. Plus they're cursed to find the other sexually attractive after pissing off the god who brought them there. And now they have to defeat a demon lord so that they can go back home and get back to normal, before the sexual tension ruins their friendship. I gotta say, the humor in this one is entirely forced. Mostly because this series just slams the sexual tension between these two literally in the opening seconds, feeling like I got smacked with a bat out the gate. I guess the handsome guy distrusting women and coming off as a bit more gay than straight, and the now girl being somewhat obnoxiously obtuse in this situation just feels more distasteful than actually funny. It's like it's trying to have its cake and eat it too, with an isekai adventure, but also a quirky rom-com. Problem is, those two aspects are tripping over each other. Animation for this is super plain, with incredibly flat coloring, zero effort put into telling the story visually, and that lazy style of humor where the characters are broken down into even more simplistic models and are basically just cutouts moving along on sticks. It's hard to describe, but it just kind of has that slapstick isekai look, where the animators are leaning hard into comedy to justify being lazy. The humor for this series is just too predictable, one note, oddly laser focused on that tired gag it drove into the ground by the opening, and the premise isn't even that unique to grab my attention. Not when comedy and parody isekais are now a dime a dozen. I guess watch if you're starved for isekai. Next up is more isekai with Kenja no Deshi o Nanoru Kenja. A guy who plays a game and is famous in it because he's so good is known as a sage. But before a limited time vanity item expires, he decides to use it and make an alt character that's a female version of his main. And I'm sure you all know how this works by now. He wakes up in that body in a world similar to, but not necessarily inside the game. So he's a nerd role-playing an old man now stuck inside a young girl with insane power and knowledge because it's an isekai. You know, I was tired of this premise by Overlord, and it hasn't gotten any more endearing after Log Horizon, How to Not Summon a Demon Lord Retry, My Next Life is a Villainous, and the other 30 you're probably thinking of, dear viewer. The premise here held enough promise to be somewhat entertaining, but the 3-minute introduction explaining the game world, then seeing the dude fuck around in it for so goddamn long, really killed my enthusiasm. Now, that might have been different if the action wasn't set to some generic J-pop that sounds like it's from the mid-2000s, and maybe had some 3D models that actually moved, or weren't goblins. Hell, and while we're going there, maybe the last 5 minutes having no dialogue would have been considered artistic, if it wasn't for the fact that it's a montage skipping over the actual premise of the show, glossing over some of the actual interesting discovery aspects, and including some absolutely unnecessary fan service. This might shape up, but as it stands, it's really bland. Too in love with its premise to actually explore it in a meaningful way. Check it out only if you're hurting for more isekai. Hey, speaking of, finally a break from isekai, we have an action romance series aimed at women with Kuroitsu-san. So while out on a job, two assassins bump into each other and end up fighting until chemistry forms. And then they keep bumping into each other until they actually fall in love. Basically the anime version of Mr. and Mrs. Smith. If you wanted a somewhat edgy anime with cold-blooded killers hooking up, this is probably what the doctor ordered. But can it entertain? Somewhat. While you'd expect this to be brooding, it's actually somewhat aware of its absurd premise and has a sense of humor, a dark one, and that's fine by me. The art is hyper polished, which is actually what I'd expect from this sort of show, but you can tell that they're running some gradients and lens flares over the animation to make it look more detailed than it is, which is unnecessary considering the backgrounds are pretty complex. I'd say the character models are even decent too. I will say, it's at least competently composed, with actual cutaways from action to build dramatic tension and establish stakes. So it's getting passing marks there. This has potential, so we'll see just how well it comes together. After that brief respite from Isekai, we're back at it with Arefureta Season 2. Well, this is awkward, because the first season got blasted hard for its lacking animation quality after the first few episodes, which they did polish up for the Blu-rays, but my issues fall more in line that this franchise peaked super early. I thought the first 6 episodes were actually pretty interesting, by abandoning the usual harem cast and turning the isekai protag trope on its head, by the guy becoming super jaded because of his journey. But then it ditches those aspects I liked and goes back to the usual. Multiple love interests and a power fantasy. Fuck off. Oh, except our boy has guns now. Fans are sure to drool over this continuation, but whether it will salvage the series for newcomers, we'll find out. Anticlimactic as it is, we're finishing this video on another second outing, with Vanitas no Carte's second core. Now this I did like, because it has a complex, interesting world that's explored through its characters, and interweaves technology, fantasy, and action into a package that stands out. Seeing where the second core will take us after having established the key players in central conflict is something I'm genuinely interested in. And if you haven't seen the first core, it was one of my top picks for summer 2021, not just because of the awesome story, but in no small part due to Bones' fantastic adaptation of this franchise. So yeah, I'm looking forward to this. Check it out for sure, but watch the first core beforehand, obviously. So that's it. We've got winter 2022 locked and loaded in the chamber. Am I optimistic about it? Not really, but there's sure to be some gems that these shows can stay the course. Hell, maybe I'll even be proven wrong and a few of these could improve dramatically. Wouldn't that be fun? But we'll just have to wait and see. For now though, you've made it to the end of the video. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, share, and do all the other YouTube stuff to help the channel grow. You can also join my Discord with a link down in the description, and if you really want to support me, you can head on over to my Patreon and pick up some extra perks, like voting on what I do next. Thanks for watching.